as we were talking, we'll talk to Shea Dixon just about this LSU roster going into the season. And we were talking a little bit before we took the break. Just, when you think back to last season, and I think the further you get away from LSU's year last season, the more it'll be frustrating because you'll see these guys like Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Jaden Daniels really starting to, make impacts on Sundays, and people will be talking about where they went to school and that they all played together and, well, what happened to them? And they had a pretty good junior season, but it was, for the most part,
he won the Heisman.
It was disappointing in the sense of what the team accomplished, right? I mean, when you think back of how great the offense was, because I don't really expect to have. I mean, I look down the line, I see Bryce Underwood, and that kid is going to be just kind of, however good he wants to be, it feels like he can be. But, having the number one offense in college football as consistent as LSU did week in, week out. You'd wake up every Monday morning, you're like, damn, they're number one again? They're still number one. They're still the best offense in college football. Another Saturday has come and gone, and they're still the best out there. I really don't kind of expect to have that ever. It doesn't necessarily have to be like that. But to think that that's what you had, and you really never even sniffed the playoff. You never even really kind of thought about being a team that was a true threat that could really make a run at it. Right? Because the defense was just that bad.
It got worse and worse every game.
Right. You just were hoping that it could improve, but then you'd turn on the TV, go to the game, and you're like, man, that was worse than I thought it was. I mean, I remember leaving Tuscaloosa. I actually pulling into Tuscaloosa, little Jay and I, and being like, man, we got to, we pull out of here tonight, we win, it's on. It's on. If we can pull this thing off tonight, LSU is going to be in a spot. And you were kind of like, man, the offense is good enough. They're going to go in here and score. If they can just get a few stops, it doesn't, you don't have to go in there and play the game of your life. Just give the ball back to them a couple of more times than Alabama gets it, and you should be okay. Because Alabama can't stop them. Right? Turns out, you get there early. Daniels over the top, Malik Neighbors is dancing in the end zone. I mean, it's here we go. And I mean, you turn Milroe into some, he legitimately thought he was the Heisman Trophy winner when he left that game. I mean, his confidence was so high because you had made him look like Bo Jackson. You never really were close, is my point, right? For as much as you wanted to be there, the defense was just, they were overtly bad. They were just bad. I mean, it was no other way to dice it. I mean, every Saturday you left the game, you thought, man, you can't win with this. You can't win with that scheme. The fact that you can't roll Mason Smith, Mekhi Wingo, Harold Perkins out there and give yourself a chance. The fact that those are 3 of the 11 that you count on, and you're this,
and they're NFL good.
They're this bad. It doesn't make any sense. This season would make more sense. Lloyd just asked me where's the pros on defense. I mean, after Harold Perkins, I'm picking. I'm grabbing straws. Right? I mean, after I want to believe Greg Penn's a pro. A couple of years ago, I thought Savion Smith was going to be a pro. That's probably not going to be the case unless something drastic happens. So, I'm sure that there are more pros on LSU's defense than Harold Perkins. If you're asking me today, where are they? I would say that they would have to prove that to me before I would know. I'm sure they're there. I don't discredit who they brought in and think that they don't have talent. I'd have to see it first. I mean, PJ Woodland sounds like he's a guy that they think is going to have a bright future.
3 years away.
Right? I mean, so when that's the case, I know that they for sure don't feel like they have one on the front, on the interior. And like we talked about last week, I'm not throwing gasoline on the season and lighting it and saying that it's over. I'd love to see how it works out with this group. I also believe that missing out on Simeon Barrow and missing out on Dominic Williams, even though they're not, they're not recognized as game stoppers or, roster changers, forget that. LSU just needs heartbeats and bodies that they can count on late in the season so they can battle through the schedule that they got to go through. I mean, you navigate just September for LSU. Just September. I mean, let's just look at the September schedule for LSU and look about where they'll be. You play on September 1st, you play USC in Vegas. If nothing else, that's going to be a huge emotion game. A lot of people are going to it's going to be high octane. You're going to be full throttle there, right? The next week you play Nicholls State at home in the home opener. Maybe a week off.
Well, and just if the opener goes the way that the previous openers have gone, I don't know how much fanfare will be there for the Nicholls State game. Like, I know it's an LSU football season opener, but if you get a win against USC, then you roll to Nicholls, those crowds are vastly different.
Sure, and LSU's due a win. Like, it's time to win an opener. I mean, all these big games that they keep scheduling, you're not scheduling to go in front of the world and fall on your face like they've done the previous 4 years on this thing. I mean, it's time to win one of these big games in an opener, and I think the pressure is probably a little bit tighter inside that building than it has been in the first 2 years of Kelly playing Florida State, where it's like, hey, all right, let's get this thing figured out, honeymooning. All right, year 3, here we go, man. I mean, you're going to Vegas, you're playing USC. They should be more, feels like, that's probably going to be more USC territory than it is LSU. Now, I expect LSU to take it over, like they do every venue. But you've got LSU, USC opening week, then you have Nicholls State for the home opener. Then you have a league opening game at South Carolina. I mean, I don't know what South Carolina looks like. I know they're replacing quarterback in different positions. I also know that Beamer he's recruited it better than just about anybody has, and he's selling it harder than anybody before him. And he's going to have that place rowdy. I mean, you talk about a road trip that'd be pretty cool to make in 2024 just to go see it.
5 points.
I mean,
it swallowed Steven Garcia whole. Never spit him back out.
And many more.
Yes.
Many more. But either way, you're at South Carolina on the 14th. Then you're back home against a bad UCLA team. I know that they're not expected to do anything. First-year head coach. The whole thing kind of blew up under the feet of Chip Kelly. But now you've got a guy, running it into Sean Foster, who's been familiar with the program. He's been there. He's not playing with a stacked deck as far as the roster is concerned. I'd imagine LSU is going to be heavy favorites here, but it's still going to be something that is different. You got to get through it. It's still in the month of September. And oh, by the way, you got South Alabama to close out September, and then, you're looking at Ole Miss in the face to start off October. I mean, it's just going to be a very emotional, competitive first month of the year that's going to really test the depth of some position groups that are going and right now are limited on them. I don't believe that Dominic Williams comes in here and makes you a top 10, top 5 team by who he is and what his capability is on the field. And I totally agree with not paying him 7 figures. My point is, now that you've missed on the high-end players there, you cannot miss on this tier 2 of defensive tackle in the transfer portal simply because you've got to have their legs, you've got to have their bodies, you've got to have the depth to even really think about making it through the schedule. I mean, before you play, after you play USC, South Carolina, UCLA, South Alabama. I don't think South Alabama can beat LSU, but South Alabama is going to come into Tiger Stadium riding high with a good team, one that has talent enough to keep you interested if you're LSU at least 3.5 quarters into it. So, every week, emotion, high, depth, all of it will be tested. That's just September. That's just September.
And that's September with a defensive line at this point where you have people are now penciling in freshmen to be able to be impact players.
Right, which is scary.
Right, because that's not where you want it to be. Like, understand that you have Gabe Rilliford and then Dominic McKinley's a 5-star, both highly rated, highly recruited. But that's a hard place to cut your teeth in the SEC is snap one, go line up in the 3 technique and play football. Like, I don't know if that's really, first of all, how quickly you can teach it. Second of all, how quickly they can grasp it. And third of all, it doesn't matter until you get on the field. You can know how to do everything, but when it gets bright, it's a whole different ballgame.
Absolutely.
And so that's what I wanted to see, and we'll talk to Shay, but there's a couple more names on this Tier 2 list for defensive line because that tells me they're going to take somebody. While I'm just saying, it could be anybody. It could be me.
Lloyd, I'm telling you, if that's the mindset of the majority of the fan base, you've got no understanding of how desperate they are for people. It's not like you're like, hey, let's shop out there and get another 4 or 5 star. You take the 1 star at this point.
Give me 3 2 stars.
And really, I agree with that. Billy Embody, I thought, brought up a great point yesterday in the sense of, I love the approach of recruiting some positions with a different tactic than you may do on other positions. For instance, when you're going after quarterback, going after a player like Bryce Underwood makes complete and total sense to me if you're a school like LSU, where you're selling in the last 5 years, you've got Burrow and Daniels. Like, hey, man, you want to come play at LSU? We got 2 Heisman Trophy winners in the last 5 years. You want to be the next one? And, oh, by the way, you're the most talented one out of all of them. So, you're selling to one player who's the best at his position. He's a 5-star guy. You're pitching a ton of accolades behind you. You've got a ton of, a couple of Heisman trophies. You got these guys that can pick up the phone. You can talk to Burrow. You can talk to Jaden Daniels. You can, all right, I'll pay attention if I'm a quarterback. If I'm a defensive tackle right now, I'm not really paying attention to LSU. Because, first off, you've had 10 defensive line coaches in the last 10 years. I don't really know anybody down there, right? There's not a high reputation in that time period for putting guys that are very high end to the league. Sure, you can sell the history of it, but, today's prospect, for as much as you and I want to believe they do, they don't know who Glenn Dorsey is. They don't know who Drake Nevis is. They don't know who Marcus Spears is. They think Marcus Spears is an NFL commentator. They don't know that he dominated the defensive line for LSU for a couple of years. So when you're selling that stuff, it doesn't really hit. They want to know, what'd you do last year? And maybe Mason Smith can give them a little bit of street cred. Jordan Jefferson can give them a little bit of street credibility. But as far as what they're selling to what these current crop of players know, it's not as rich as Alabama, as Georgia, as Texas A&M.
The way that it's being pitched as being recruited just defensive line at this point, or even the transfer portal for LSU, I think it's because Brian Kelly knows what he has in place here with the coaching staff, their ability to recruit. It just feels like it was like 1 year early on the statement or tried to make the statement. Like he was pitching the program in a news article, like in a news hit about, why you didn't get a guy. And it's like, well, this is what we do at LSU. It's like, it felt like he was making a statement that maybe people didn't know or you should have known about LSU in a sense of this is kind of how they've done it. And he's been preaching like we're going to graduate champions, all of that stuff. And then like we want to retain and recruit. And he mentioned the state of Louisiana and how talent rich it is. Like I understand all of that. But you also said when there's time to go out and get a player, you get one. And so I don't think you needed to go get a 7-figure defensive tackle that isn't worth 7 figures. I get that. But you need to start adding some pieces here soon.
And that's what I was, making the point of. Billy Embody, I thought, made it yesterday, and I agree with him. Recruiting a defensive tackle position, recruiting an offensive line position, hell, even recruiting a wide receiver position where you go get numbers, you go get players. You may not go get the highest end of the player, but you go get the solid bunch of the players, right? Where you bring in 5 defensive tackles next recruiting cycle. And while maybe none of them are 5-star, and I know that our guy out of St. Aug, Stewart, is in the next couple of cycles, and he's the best player in the country, and absolutely, you get him. He's in your backyard. He grew up wanting and loving LSU. You've got Bo Davis now in place. You go get that player when he's kind of on a silver platter for you, but you don't travel to go grab a player like him when you can go get numerous players to fill the depth void that LSU is missing there.
Yeah, I think it's an easy way to look at it a lot of people are going to look around and say, why did this happen? I mean, you pretty much laid it out. You haven't had the same coach in multiple cycles at defensive line. You haven't had anybody to recruit the position. And then by the time you have what a historically bad defense that the guys that you were hoping to retain don't want anything to do with the next year, and like they must have gotten some pretty good advice to be able to say, I can go to the draft and not have to do this thing whenever. Like plan A was bring back Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo. And they probably didn't want to go through another rebuild for their, like that would have been Mason Smith, his 4th coach in 4 years?
Yeah.
At defensive line. It's like, I can't do this again. I'm going to go to the league and get developed. So I think it's just a right now problem. I think down the road, as you've seen how they were already able to recruit, when you have freshmen good enough that you think you can rely on them already, I think when you look back at this, like this will be the last kind of era of where was your defense? Like, I think the next 3 or 4 years, you'll be like, okay, LSU football's back in terms of not being the worst defense in the country, but more so at like, okay, they have a kind of a dominant defense that flies around. Like, this is the LSU we're used to seeing.